In this lecture, we're moving now to Module 3, which is about English speaking skills. And we're linking still our activities in lectures to the task of the assignment, which is planning a unit of work. As you know, I discourage any attempt of talking about planning which is not actually linked to any intellectual concepts, and these concepts have to be powerful enough for you to serve you as organizing principles. So I have started a semester talking about exploratory learning, and I have explained how exploratory learning fits with the principles of diversity, inclusion, and learner-centeredness. They are outlined very precisely in one of our activities. I think it's Sheep Game or any of those two, or Sam's Games. I think Sheep Game in lecture 2 had them outlined. Okay. So just for those who actually are unclear, approach is not values or objectives. Approach is basically a statement on which you base an entire teaching practice of yours. So as you know, in my classes, or the approach I encourage you to use relates to the concept of meaning construction, and I will take you through these steps again in more detail down the track today. But even though I talk about exploratory learning and the theory of meaning construction, all of this is actually still set against a higher objective of education, and this is that education is about expansion. So you will by now know that I think there's a role of nannies in our house. Like if you have a child and you are a working person and you need someone to look after your child, you pay someone $10–20 per hour and they do things. Obviously they may not actually be able to do it in a way how professional educators would be doing, but that's fine. But there has to be a difference between a casual nanny that comes into your house and a professional educator. So as you can see on this slide, I talk about education being about generating expansion. So the expansion is in values, why people do things. It is not that people have to accept someone else's values, but it is about learning that people's action is set in terms of values, and it is important for students to actually relativize their own concepts so that they do not feel that any difference is actually, or anything which is unfamiliar should be resented. So we create expansions in values, in students' understandings what people do. Children have limited number of experiences, as we all do. Not all of us have access to everything that people do, but education should actually facilitate some form of expansion in understanding what people do. So also how people do things, right? So these are the kind of points of focus I would like you to keep in mind when you talk about, or when you practice your profession as a teacher. So the aim for you wouldn't be to just model things and hope that students will catch what you see, but in fact it would be to create conditions for children to actually see more. Now, the objectives of Module 3 are about understanding the differences between first and second language learning, also between spoken and written English, how to plan units of work of any kind and of any size, and also how to assess. Now, if you look actually at 3.6 section of that module, where it actually outlines for you some understanding about assessment, notice that it has a statement there. Assessment is the pivotal point of all teaching. Notice here too, teaching needs to begin with assessment. I have taken it from the module itself. So my question to you is, if teaching is to begin with assessment, what do you think that means? Obviously, you will not on day one assess students' learning that they haven't undergone yet. But as you know by now from my lecture last week, that means that all your planning must begin with your assessment. You must be very, very clear what is it that you will be doing in this unit, not what children will achieve. As you say, children will learn this or children will learn that. Exactly what is the focus of children's work. And then you design your learning activities as support that will help students to actually complete the assessment. Right? So that's why it is so important to be very, very clear from the word go about the focus of your unit of work. What is it that you will be assessing exactly? Like, what is it that students will do? And what is it, therefore, the point of focus around which you will organize the entire unit of work? Now, what I've done here is to actually show you a few aspects of how this assessment is to be constructed. So, in terms of activities like presentation, creating things, in terms of actually activities that test students' capacity to use English language for communicative purposes, as outlined in earlier lecture, I have written for you here, or devised for you here, as a model of what actually how you could actually think of such a communicative activity and what goes into it. So say that your students are creating a presentation for argument's sake. So what you will want there to be is three major components, which is the structure, the mood of it, whether it's right, and the presentation, whether it's right. Now, when you actually devise your assessment criteria, you should look at subcomponents, which is overall structure. Does it actually look like presentation? And then internal or lower level structure, which means does it actually have is it actually internally so organized that it actually looks neat and resembles a presentation and all the expectations that people have of presentations, or does it start looking like anything other than that? Mood. So not every presentation has the same purpose. If you actually look at presentations by Steve Jobs, they are on the net. There is actually on YouTube a presentation which is called Presenting Like Steve Jobs. And they actually show us, in that presentation, they show us elements of what makes a good presentation. But you must keep in mind that Steve Jobs, when he was actually announcing the iPhone or anything else he might have, he does it in order to sell it. Right? So he will be screaming his message off the tops of the roofs. Right? He's not there to convince anybody to think intellectually, to compare and contrast elements. His point is, look, I'm great, the product is great, we have changed the world. That's his point. So different purposes of presentations will have then different mood. So the mood will be communicated through different language tools and through the use or reliance on different genres. And I now know that many of you will think, oh well, Ania, if it is a presentation, then it is already a genre. That is true. That is true. But genre, like everything else in life, comes with other genres. So it's with whole families of genres. So I will actually expand on it in a second. But yes, presentation is a genre in itself. Then presentation in order to facilitate a sale or in order to advertise is a different genre. And then those genres will call upon other genres. So for example, if Steve Jobs wants to come across as funny because it will help to sell, he will use elements from the genre of humor. You can see? So that's why I have actually put here these little arrows, because not one language tool will actually communicate the mood, but many at the sentence level, at the phrase level, at the modality level, for example, and with genre as well. There will be different sources of human activity that we will call upon in order to actually make the mood come across the way we would like to happen. And then is presentation. Presentation is, again, was the language choice correct? And also modalities. You will be covering in different literacy units the idea of the text being multimodal. And obviously, when students make presentations, we would want them to rely on more than just one way of presenting information. Mind you, not for every purpose. Again, so at least if they use only one mode, they made that selection critically. So there. Let's have a look here at the concept of genre as I was talking about it before. So what do we have here? Like, for example, here it's the hardest genre for many Anglo-Saxon students to actually catch. Where are you going? Where are you going? I mean, you think that it doesn't belong to any genre, it's just a question, but this is not quite, because actually it's famous for Vadis. It's a famous sentence that Jesus asked, I think, Peter or Paul. You can actually catch me here on my knowledge of the Bible, but basically it's a biblical phrase. It belongs to it's one of those biblical stories. Right, so that sentence belongs to the Bible. Now, what does this have to do with the mood? Students could use it actually to make even stronger, to invite even in a stronger way the audience to reflect about the direction that we take as a class or as a society or as a group in regard to some issues, right? So if you say, where do you think you're going? It sounds not the same as actually have a title, Quo Vadis. I mean, I read it in the Latin way I was taught. You probably in English will read it Quo Vadis. I don't think it's Latin, but yeah, nobody knows how Latin sounded. So that's one source of genre, which is a biblical knowledge. 1 for 3 and 3 for 1. I wonder whether any of you actually remember. That's from the Three Musketeers, right? So that's students can play on it and can say, 1 for 5 or 1 for whatever, just to actually make a point. So it's not what the country does for you. So all of you know is J.F. Kennedy. I had a dream. All of you know where it comes from. And the world owes you nothing. It was there first. Well, it's Mark Twain. So you can see how in order to make the mood come across the way that it actually serves your purpose, serves your message, you would draw your sentences, your information about the world from different sources, and you will choose those sources critically so that it actually underlines or underscores your intention of your presentation. Here it's how people play on genre. For example, I'm not sure how many of you actually know about the Pavlov's dog. So whole behaviorism relies on this experiment that Pavlov was training the dog to salivate at particular times when he rang the bell, and then so Pavlov rings the bell, the dog salivates, and then that means that learning is based on such stimuli response kinds of actions. Now, that was 19th century, I think. But look at here, people actually took this story about Pavlov's dog and they turned it around, and this dog says, "Watch what I can make Pavlov do. As soon as I drool, he will smile and write in his little book." So what happens is, from Pavlov's perspective, the dog was drooling and therefore the experiment worked, but from dog's perspective, the whole experiment looked differently. So that's how people play with genre, which means the genre of an experiment, the sort of science genre, they turned into a joke. Just to show perspectivity. And the dogs are not as stupid as some people used to think. Okay, so there's another genre here, playing with genre. I have befriended someone on Facebook and they put this joke onto my Facebook. Now, we all have seen this joke with the giraffe looking into the airplane's window, but wasn't it nice? So again, we have a genre of a giraffe being tall and of the plane being high in the sky, and this is just makes the whole thing very funny. So connecting two different aspects of life, two different stories, two different types of knowledge, giraffe, tall, aeroplane, high, bringing them together made it really funny. Here too, what we have, someone or the author used the genre of Aboriginal art in order to actually make a strong point about non-linearity of learning. So that's quite nice way to represent the concept of non-linearity. I have actually put some things here for you. You might one day want to use them with your students. And this is just to, if you were to actually engage students or children in the task of actually exploring how to go about a particular project, like creating or developing a presentation or something else, so that they actually know how many aspects we will be exploring, how much goes into the process of writing. This quite nicely focuses them that there is more into writing than just the pain of typing. Now, I have obviously, knowing me, I would have put a computer here because, and some of you might be thinking this is all for kindergarten or sort of early childhood or young primary children, but in fact not, because as you know, social media and constructing things in order to connect and to learn more, therefore it is as important for academic students as it is for primary. So here are now our objectives. To now give you a bit of a understanding how I'm going to go about actually addressing each of these points for the purpose of this lecture only, let us have a look at the next slide. So you will have readings in your module 3 that will discuss differences between L1 and L2. Now, the main point that I would like you to actually get from those readings is not what often is suggested, that you need to know everything about every language, therefore you will devise your teaching strategies better. Obviously, the more language knowledge you actually have, surely that will be of value. But I have given you in module 1, when we were doing still module 1, this example of a reading which talks about language shapes thought. Now, it's a very, very important reading. That actually, it's simply written. It was published in the Scientific American, which is just a popular literature journal. But the point they make is of foundational value, because in the past people thought that we don't shape that language does not shape thought. In fact, it's not for the past 5 or 10 years. For half a century or longer, people actually argued about it. But this article shows you examples of 40 years of research that proves that that's how it is. And that's very important, because who we are, how our brain is shaped, how our brain selects information. Our brain doesn't see things, our brain selects. We train children. You know how little infants can learn every language. Not only they can learn every language, but it was proven that they can discriminate between every sound of every language on this planet. If I had the brain of an infant, I wouldn't have an accent. But what happens with learning, we teach children to eliminate particular discriminatory skills, and we focus them on a particular skill that is relevant for their survival in their environment. So what happens is that as we live, as we become increasingly socialized, we lose a lot of skills that we were born with. In fact, research says that you will never, ever, ever again have as many neurons in your life as you had at birth. That's very interesting. What happens is they just disappear because the brain doesn't need them. So you're very much world ready when you arrive, and what socialization says to you, well, maybe you are world ready, but we don't need that readiness for every aspect of your life. So what I'm trying to say is that language prepares us for that language is an outcome. How can I put it? Language prepares us for the world, and therefore is a device for how to actually look at the world, how to work with the world. So it shapes our brain. It shapes how we see, what we select, how we perceive the world. So obviously, as a teacher, the most fundamental understanding that you need to have is that your students from other cultures and from other languages actually do not see the world the same way. I don't have time to actually produce every evidence for it, but on YouTube, when you ever have time, there is evidence that even that people just don't see color the same way. So there's a very funny video where people went to a particular tribe in Africa and they show them green or blue color, and you would see blue. They swear it's green, or the other way. I just can't recall exactly. But you couldn't mistake them, and yet they swear these two colors are the same. So language shapes thought, and fundamentally from all the literature you have read or will read, you should know that. And then there are different meaning-making devices. So they will be, like your textbooks will say, different words for different things, different intentions. We talk in intentions. Those intentions are culturally actually loaded. That's why languages don't translate very well. I have students who produce things in English, but actually for Thai audience, and it sounds hilarious to us, and vice versa. So a lot of times we don't have language problems, we have world organization problems. So that is something that I would like you to actually come out from this unit with, that you actually understand that, so that now you have an educated eye. When you work with people from different cultures, you don't actually get impatient or helpless. The idea now is of how to actually break down all these communication devices so that students can co-construct in relation to your in relation to your assistants a different way of selecting things from reality, so that they become increasingly more able to cooperate or work with people who speak English. Okay, so that's my first point. The second point, I will address the differences between spoken and written English. I will not obviously create differences. I will not create a summary of textbook. I'll just address these points, or this point, only in terms of students' questions we had on campus. This is our lecture 1 in module 3. The rest of this PowerPoint will be about how to plan or implications to planning and how to assess. I will just summarize what we have spoken before, but I will do this in it shortly. So let us look first at the question about those differences. Now, students on campus had very practical questions, which is okay. We have students. Let's say whether they come from a Chinese background or indigenous background, they have accents, they have their way of speaking English, and how do we now work with it in a way that doesn't actually depreciate or deprecate the ways they actually are accustomed to. So one of the answers I produced was that in order to actually, even for someone like me who has an accent in English, obviously, though I've been here in Australia, you wouldn't believe, for I can't remember anymore, 27, 28 years. So the idea is now to support our children not in changing the ways they do things at home, but in fact to sensitize them to develop ways of being in English that actually enable them to talk to other speakers of English. And they don't have to be Australian speakers. They can be people from Poland, they can be people from China, and so on. So the idea is now to actually find ways of working with English so that we are comprehensible, so that our presentation doesn't look like the chat between mom and a child, because presentation is actually a device, a communicative device for purposes that are not informal. You might actually make an informal presentation, but presentation is in itself a formal device. So we want students to actually use particular means of communication so that they actually can function with other people who are aware of those tools, of those and come into a communicative context with particular expectations of how it should look and what words it should have, and also what communicative or language devices you'll be using and how you'll be pronouncing things to actually be able to communicate your message. There's no point of being idiosyncratic. If we go outside, we need to be actually comprehensible. So the problem often is that that I have noticed as a non-native speaker of English is as follows. If a person has a Chinese accent or Polish accent, I mean, I find it very difficult to understand Polish people speaking English, because what happens is they have this idiosyncratic accent, and if they don't work hard enough of actually making it a little bit more towards English, an Anglo-Saxon person understands them perfectly, but I don't. And the same happens with you students who are now listening to me and who are not native speakers of English. They will find it much harder to understand me than anybody who speaks English in a native way. Very interesting, isn't it? I have learned French because French was spoken by my husband and my mother-in-law. And all the family and friends of my husband were French, so I heard French as it was. And when I went into a formal context where we had speakers of French who were actually speaking with an English accent, I understood nothing. And those people found it quite annoying, I would say, because I remember a particular woman who was married to a Frenchman, and I just understood nothing, and she couldn't understand why I could understand a quick speech of her husband, and yet hers I couldn't understand, and I couldn't. So what we want really is for our students to develop ways of being in English that actually make them comprehensible and therefore empowered to be able to actually act with a larger group of people than just their immediate context, which is the home context where they have particular ways of using English. How do we create a need for English? Well, exactly that. It is about engaging students in activities that are produced for an international audience or for Australian audience, where English is basically the lingua franca, the language that we use in order to actually share feelings, to share um, our understandings, to share our ideas. There's nothing racist about it. It's very good to learn other languages, and I teach German myself, but it's good to have a lingua franca that we can actually work with. So basically introducing students in activities, and that's what I said before in my last lecture, when they actually when the purpose of the activity is to share, even that actually helps you to uh, give students reason why they actually should be doing this in English, in a particular standard English, because if sharing is the key, then if you want to share, you better make it actually comprehensible. To be comprehensible, we better explore, all of us, what makes a particular activity, what are the expectations that go into a particular activity. So as I said, while this unit focuses on ESL students, not everybody knows how to create a presentation. I'm sure that most of our students in this unit don't necessarily know how to go about creating a presentation. So these skills and these explorations we will be doing will not be just for ESL students. Every student will benefit. The more we actually break down the task of creating presentations or creating anything, the more we break it down, the more chances we give to all students to actually explore what goes into those texts, what is actually happening, and therefore the more chance they have to engage meaningfully in the assessment activity or in that project. How do we include other languages or cultures? We have actually spoken about it on campus. I have also addressed this in my response to a student's discussion board posting. But basically, remember that education is about expansion of what, why, and how. We can actually, the expansion may not actually just focus on how things are done in English, but basically what values are there. And so the what would be the kind, what people do, how people feel about different things, and so what did we have? I just have to actually go back so that we can actually look in a more systematic way. So expansion of values, that we can actually explore why people do different things. What is it that actually motivates their actions? What people do, we can explore across cultures. What people do. So it's not always what people do just only in Australia or in your school, but we could actually include the element, the international element or intercultural element, and also how people do things as well. So you see how this, when you actually think of education as an expansion and you have these three principles, all of a sudden this is so helpful, because the concept of how to include other cultures now is gaining some focus. So if we expand and if we enable compare and contrast, then we might expand and compare and contrast this element, and this element. Isn't it neat? That's why it is important to have some intellectual framework, because even now, as I'm recording live my own talk, I am actually under quite a bit of a stress. So I can go back to my slide, look for the steps I have devised there, and then answer my own question in a coherent way. So okay, there was another question that the student asked was, for example, she had a 5-year-old child in class, and the child couldn't read but did very well in telling a story, but just by using pictures. So now how do we now move these children from that stage to writing? Obviously, what's writing actually doing? Writing enables us to store information, to communicate it. So if a child actually produced a story using pictures, it's going to be harder for this child and other children to actually just using pictures to remember the story if they attempted to repeat it. So wouldn't it be nice now to use those pictures that on which the child based her story, and now put little text next to them? So shopping, I don't know, whatever else, forest. So slowly we actually give students the reason for learning to, for connecting and for connecting spoken language and pictures, because to actually repeat, or for someone else to repeat the story of a child, they will need writing. Now I'm fully aware that at the age of 5 what will happen is that only you will be able to actually read that shopping or forest. But you know what? That's pretty good, because this is not quite the case. Children don't work the same way as we think. What will happen if you produce those words next to the pictures in order to actually support children's memory about the story that the child created? You could be quite manipulative here or strategic in a good way. So what happens now, you could actually say to children that you use these devices to remind them what went next and what was next and what was next. But you also start to invite their curiosity, that they could actually, for them to actually see that words are written in order to actually store information for its later retrieval. And in that way, they start gently creating the link between the text and the spoken language. So that's quite a nice strategy. And you could build on it further and engage children in recreating the story, not the story, but recreating the activity that the first girl did, creating their own stories. And then you again would engage in this typing those words for supporting memory, right? Over and over again, and you start actually teaching children to value writing. And that's how writing became valuable, because it actually enabled generation after generation, or person from person, to actually to store information and to have it for later retrieval. Summarize this part of the lecture. Now, when we were talking about assessment, as I said, assessment, what belongs to the activity, we've got a higher level structure, which is of the higher level criteria, which are the structure of the story, the mood, the presentation. And what you can actually do when devising an assessment activity is to specify what actually you are after when teaching and then when assessing. And that will help you actually to plan your unit of work, because you will know exactly what you're after. You have your little tree here. So structure would be basically information literacy. I could have easily written here information literacy, and that involves aspects of text organization that make the text what it should be like. So it's the overall and then internal organization. It also involves students in critically selecting items so that that the structure is clear and it actually complies with the requirements of feeling like, let's say for argument's sake, a presentation, and also at the level of detail, it also actually resembles a presentation. Now, you can, each of these aspects, using your curriculum, you can actually break down into other aspects, other objectives. And all of this will serve you to create activities that will break them down further, so that you can actually support students understanding what goes in order for the structure to actually be done well. The same for mood. You have the sort of top level of organization. It has to feel like a formal presentation or like a humorous presentation. It has to feel like trying to convince people to something. So you have an overall mood, and now you have your language devices, genre devices, and now you can look into language curriculum for um, other outcomes, and you can break down these ones and then devise your activities that support this aspect of the project or of the assessment. Devise your activities by actually drawing on the learning outcomes as ideas of focus, right? So you don't devise your support activities, or you're not left alone to do that. You can use your imagination by all means, because I don't think that any curriculum is exhaustive. But the curriculum will provide you with a range of ideas regarding what goes into each of those aspects, and the same for presentation. So what belongs to the activity? Well, we have all these three levels, then we have sub-level, maybe there's more sub-levels than I have actually accounted for, and then there are sub-sub-levels. And all of this needs to be supported through your learning activities, and it has to be written out in the unit of work. Preferably, it would be very nice if you had a resource either for all of them at once or for each of them separately, with different activities of compare and contrast, so that students can actually start making sense of what's expected. Now, we have spoken about the intercultural element here, and maybe there will be moments in terms of who does presentations. Presentations are not done in Sudan, in the desert, so that would not in the same way, definitely, and probably not by children. If anybody does a presentation of or speaks out, that will be an adult. So you will want students to actually be exposed to the practice, or explore the practice of giving presentation in a way that allows children to feel confident that children can give presentations, females can give presentations, and there's a multitude of contexts where presentations are called for, and therefore the activity actually makes sense for them. So that's pretty much how I would suggest you could structure your learning unit in terms of support, because it actually allows you to draw on curricular outcomes, but it makes then your plan focus on how to support those learning outcomes, not how to leave them there and just say, well, students will achieve that, and without giving me any confidence that that's true. Okay, I'll close it here, and the second part will focus on planning.